Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Hayya ala salah.
So I'm going to do a lot of reading, as I usually do. And there are no happenings that, both speakers before me went up and covered, certain things pertaining to our duties and our rights as citizens and as members. The brother here covered the divine constitution and bylaws. And I'm going to go into a lot of our obligations and our duties as members. And I'm going to start by reading from the chapter of magistrate and subject in our circle 7, and that is chapter 29. When you have it, say it's done.
Islam.
Chapter 29. Okay. And it says, it reads, Magistrate and subject, O thou, the favorite of heaven, whom the sons of men, thy equals, have agreed to raise to sovereign power, and set as a ruler over themselves. Consider the ends and importance of their trust, far more than dignity and height of thy station. Thou art clothed in purple or clothed in royalty and seated on a throne. The crown of majesty investeth thy temples. The scepter of power is placed in thy hand. But not for thyself were these ensigns given, not meant for thine own, but for the good of thy kingdom. The glory of a king is the welfare of his people. His power and dominion rest on the hearts of his subjects. The mind of a great prince is exalted with the grandeur of his station. He evolveth high things and searcheth for business worthy of his power. And there can be linked that the mind of a great prince is exalted with the grandeur of his station. That can be linked with chapter 23, verse 12, speaking of benevolence, the attribute of benevolence. He calleth the wise, verse 5, he calleth the wise men of his kingdom. He consulteth among them with freedom, and heareth the opinions of them all. He looketh among his people with discernment. He discovereth the abilities of men, and employeth them according to their merits. Now this in particular is in relation to, or is the duty of our magistrate or of our leader. And this can also be, I say this all the time, that it can be referred to us as well as leaders of society, as leaders, because as Moorish Americans, whether we like it or not, we are leaders of society. We are to be that light in the world, in the society. And I'll also read from the next chapter, chapter 30. And I'll read this one in its entirety, and then I'm going to go into another piece of literature. It is the holy instructions from the prophet, the social duties. Now this is for everyone. This is for everyone in the temple, and it speaks about, like it says, our social duties, what our duties are to humanity, what our duties are to our nation, what our duties are to our temple. When thou considerest thy wants, when thou beholdest thy imperfections, acknowledge his goodness, O Son of humanity, who honored thee with humanity, endowed thee with speech, and placed thee in society to receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations, protections from injury, thy enjoyments and comforts and pleasures of life. I'll read those again because this is very important as we go into our next reading. O Son of humanity, who honored thee with humanity, endowed thee with speech, and placed thee in society. He didn't place us by ourselves. He didn't say, Brother Kenneth Montgomery Bey, you go out there and do it on your own. You have brothers and sisters here to help support you in your endeavors.
Islam.
Islam. And what are we placed in society to receive and confer? We have mutual obligations, so we have a duty to one another. We have protection from injuries or our safety, and the enjoyments and the comforts and pleasures of life. All these thou owest to the assistance of others, and couldst not enjoy but in the bands of society. So we can't enjoy these as a Negro. We can't enjoy these, waking up and calling ourselves black and being unto ourselves. We have to enjoy these with each other, because in order to be a sovereign nation or a sovereign state, we have to be completely independent of other nations. We have to be able to sustain ourselves on our own as a nation. We have to be able to govern all of the affairs of our nation on our own, as a group, as a collective. And it takes a collective to do that. I can't be, the secretary and be over, what is it, the waterworks or the plumbing and sewage. I can't do both of those, So we have to all come together and contribute whatever our gift or our skill is that Allah has bestowed upon us. It is thy duty, therefore, verse 2. It is thy duty, therefore, to be a friend to mankind, as it is thy interest that man should be friendly unto thee. As the rose beareth sweetness from its own nature, so the heart of a benevolent man produces good works. He enjoyeth the ease and tranquility of his own breast, and rejoiceth in the happiness and prosperity of his neighbor. So if we're doing good as Moorish American, or if I'm doing good as a Moorish American, my brother or my sister should be doing well as well. And if they're not doing as well as I am, I should extend that hand to see how we can uplift that brother or sister. He openeth not his ear unto slander. The faults and failings of men give a pain to his heart. His desire is to do good, and he researcheth out the occasion thereof. In removing the oppression of another, that's what we just spoke on, he relieveth himself. From the largeness of his mind, he comprehended in his wishes the happiness of all men, and from the generosity of his heart, he endeavoreth to promote it. Islam. And now I will read from a book that was referred to us by our Grand Governor. It is The Law of Nations by Imre Vattel. And this one is, Imre Vattel is a Swiss lawyer. So he dealt with international law and the law of nations, the law of sovereign states. And the chapter that I'll be reading from is called The Law of Nations. Of nations considered in themselves. And it's basically speaking of, well, we'll just get into it. I'll just read it. And it's chapter 1 of nations or sovereign states. And listen to, as we read this, brother, I'm not sure if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the Circle 7? Or is this? Yes, ma'am. You are familiar with the Circle 7. So as we read this and we listen to this from a Swiss lawyer, listen to hear the words of your prophet in this. Islam. A nation or state is as has been said at the beginning of this work, a body politic, or a society of men united together for the purpose of promoting their mutual safety and advantage by their combined strength. So that goes back to, I'm going to open this, our Circle 7 back up. It says that we're placed in the bands of society to receive protection from injuries. That's our mutual safety. From the very design that induces a number of men to form a society which has its common interests and which is to act in concert with it is necessary that there should be established a public authority to order and direct what is to be done by each in relation to the end of the association. This political authority is the sovereignty, and he or they who are invested with it are the sovereign. So this is, in the Moorish Science Temple of America, this is our Sheikh staff. This is our Grand Sheikh. This is our Assistant Grand Sheikh. these are those people, as it said in our chapter of magistrate and subject, that we exalt, to be the sovereign over us, to act on behalf of us. And I think I'm going to skip down a little bit. It says, it is evident that by the very act of the civil or political association, each citizen subjects himself to the authority of the entire body and everything that relates to the common welfare. So in this, we can't say as members of the Moorish Science Temple of America, I'm a Moor or I'm a Moorish American, or I'm a Moor, but I'm not an American. You have to be a Moorish American. That's the program that our prophet set up. And you can't pick and choose which laws you want to obey. We have to understand that our prophet brought us something that's perfect. Our prophet brought us everything that we need in order to redeem ourselves as a nation. So we have to subscribe to all of the laws, and we're going to get into the laws and why they were instituted. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Okay, and it says, every nation that governs itself under what form soever without dependence on any foreign power is a sovereign state. That's as what we spoke of before. In order to be considered a sovereign state or a sovereign nation, we have to be able to sustain ourselves. Are we considered a sovereign nation now? No. Not at all. We don't produce, purify our own water. We don't produce our own food on a mass scale. We don't make our clothing on a mass scale. We're getting there. We're developing. We're understanding what it means to be in the bands of society once again. Whether we're Moorish Americans, whether we're Nuwapians, whether we're, Hebrew Israelites, all of these, we have some type of concept of brotherhood and sisterhood and nationhood. We're learning that again. Its rights are naturally, speaking of the sovereign state, its rights are naturally the same as those of any other state. Such are the moral persons who live together in a natural society, subject to the law of nations. To give a nation a right to make an immediate figure in the grand society, it is sufficient that it be really sovereign and independent, that it is, that it governs itself by its own authority and laws. 1 second. I'm going to skip down a little bit. Okay, so going into, I'm going to go ahead into chapter 2, and it's entitled General Principles of the Duties of a Nation Towards Itself. So this is our obligation of what we have to provide for ourselves, and this can be applied to us as Moorish Americans. If the rights of a nation spring from its obligations, it is principally form those that relate to itself. Excuse me, I'm going to read that again. If the rights of a nation spring from its obligations, it is principally form those that relate to itself. It will further appear that its duties towards others depend very much on its duties towards itself, as the former are to be regulated and measured by the latter. As we are then to treat of the obligations and rights of nations, and attention to order requires that we should begin by establishing what each nation owes itself. So what do we owe ourselves as Moorish Americans? What duties do we have as Moorish Americans? The floor is open. It's not rhetorical.
Social duties. The social duties.
Social duties. And what does that include? What is, as a member of the Moorish Science Temple of America, what is your obligation? What is one of your obligations?
To help uplift fallen humanity
How do we do that?
by teaching our people to be themselves.
Who are we?
Moorish Americans.
Moorish Americans, Islam. So that's one of our duties, to teach ourselves. And I give honors to our Grand Governor today for teaching our babies. We went to a high school today, and of course, what did the brother say? You don't know, you never know what you don't know.
How much you don't know.
Until you hear it.
Right.
You don't know what you don't know. So these children, they don't understand that. Well, I won't say they don't understand. Hopefully they understand now, but it wasn't a thought before, that they weren't Negro, black, and color. It's what they told me, so I'm Negro, black, and color. And they went through life with that until possibly today. They probably never heard it before in their life. You're not Negro, black, and colored. You're Moorish American. You know, so that is a very important duty, is to teach each other things to uplift ourselves, and not just that we're Moorish American, but what it means to be Moorish American. You know, I can say I'm Moorish American and then, you know, go out and dress any kind of way or act any kind of way or be outside smoking cigarettes and, you know, dishonoring myself in front of other people, you know, and representing that I'm not representing my Moorish culture. So along with teaching that you're Moorish American, we have to teach how to behave as a Moorish American, or how to conduct ourselves as Moorish Americans in the society. Islam. And I'm going to continue. It says, an attention to order requires that we should begin by establishing what each nation owes to itself. So we should reflect on that. What do we owe to ourselves during the weeks to come? The general and fundamental rule of our duties towards ourselves is that every moral being ought to live in a manner comfortable to his nature. And that goes into our Circle 7. I'll read down a little bit further and then I'll pull from our Circle 7. It says, a nation is a being determined by its essential attributes. Where do our essential attributes come from? Our essential attributes come from Allah. We are a seed of Allah. We are that essence of Allah made manifest. So we should be establishing laws that send us back to our essential nature, which is Allah. A nation is being determined by its essential attributes that has its own nature and can act in conformity to it. And I'm going to pull from our Circle 7 something that I think I read it last week as well, or the previous week. The chapter on religion, I think that's chapter 35, I believe, yes. And we're going to read from verse, I thought I had it highlighted. Verse 10, I have it written down here. Chapter 35, verse 10. He hath instituted laws, speaking of Allah, he hath instituted laws for the government of the world. He hath wonderfully varied them in all beings, and each by his nature conformeth to his will. And then we're going to go down to verses 21 through 24 of that same chapter. And in the laws he hath ordained as the rule of life. So kindly hath he united thy duty to thy nature, that obedience to his precepts is happiness to thyself. O praise his goodness with songs and thanksgiving, and meditate in silence on the wonders of his love. Let thy heart overflow with gratitude and acknowledgement. Let the language of his lips speak praise and adoration. Let the actions of thy life show thy love to his law. Allah is just and righteous, and will judge the earth with equity and truth. Hath he established his laws in goodness and mercy, and shall he not punish the transgressor thereof? So in that's speaking of Allah, but that can also be likened to our magistrate or to our leaders as well. We as leaders are to establish laws that are in line with our nature. And then as leaders, we're also to enforce those laws when the time comes. Islam. And I'll finish this part up, and then I will read the rest next week, inshallah. There are then actions of a nation such as wherein it is concerned in its national character, and which are either suitable or opposite to what constitutes it as a nation, so that it is not a matter of indifference whether it performs some of these actions or omits others. In this respect, the law of nature prescribes its certain duties. We shall see this in the first book, what conduct a nation ought to observe in order that it may not be wanting to itself. but we shall first sketch out the general idea of this subject, Islam.
Islam.
And so it goes in this next section, it goes into more into our duties as members of society. And one of our, or three of our duties is the preservation of our nation. And another one is the perfection of our nation. And another duty is to work to achieve that goal that we set out to achieve. Now, we should all have that common goal as a nation or as a society. We should all have that common end, but we may play different parts in that common end. For example, our brother chairman is an artist, you know, a graphic artist. He may do certain things within that nation. And our brother here, brother Kenneth, what do you do?
IT.
IT,
Information technology.
Islam. So that may be your role within the nation. But we all have to come together to achieve that common goal, that end goal of uplifting our nation, uplifting all of humanity. And with that, I will leave you as I came in peace. Islam.
حي على الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر حي على الصلاة الله أكبر